left wing uses junk science and altered data to try and push their agendas such as fake global warming. They did it with global warming, and now we're finding out that the big pharmaceutical companies may have been doing this in their clinical trials of medicines. Joining us now with a look into this is Robert Scott Bell.
Thanks, Michael. It's great to be back with you and the Savage Nation audience, bringing a message of health, freedom, and liberty where it is so needed in our country. And the work you're doing, I'm ever so grateful for. I mentioned we reviewed a little bit of trickle-up poverty because of the health scare chapter, which continues to scare and frighten anybody who is knowledgeable and aware that the government knows little or nothing about health care. In fact, what it does know is disease management and mandatory participation in disease management and the endorsement of a monopoly system of drugging everything that moves. And although many have been, let's say millions of Americans have been duped into believing that what the government is promoting is a scientific evidence-based medicine. There's a huge article that broke based on a scientific study or meta-analysis that has been kind of brushed aside. It was a little bleep, but now we're gonna hit it hard today, Michael.
This is the report on the placebos?
Yes, placebo. The placebo fraud that rocks the very foundation of modern medical science, as thousands of clinical trials must now be invalidated. Interesting enough, the so-called gold standard of modern medicine and medical science is the double-blind, placebo-controlled, multi-centered trials that now we're finding out were not as scientific as we were led to believe.
Why do you say that?
We already know that according to the Starfield Report 2000 in the Journal of the American Medical Association, that a bare minimum 106,000 Americans are dying every year. That's over 1 million Americans that have died due to so-called science evidence-based medicine, for which Obama is definitely a big fan of, and we'll talk about a particular executive order that he signed recently based on that. But there are no rules, evidently, on what they call the placebos within these studies. Now, the study was called What's in Placebos? Who knows? An analysis of randomized controlled trials. Beatrice A. Gollum, MD, PhD, was the lead researcher here. And basically it started with this understanding that there were actually no regulations governing placebo composition.
Really?
Now, why are placebos important? Because they have to really measure these drugs or whatever they're testing against nothing, so to speak, to the best of their ability so that they can measure, is it better, worse, or not at all changed between what is nothing and what is supposedly something, a drug, or even a nutrient for that matter. So we've got a real pickle here because thousands of studies now, they found they didn't even describe what the placebo was, what was in it.
Well, why is that important?
For instance, if you utilize, let's say, a sugar pill, a lactose sugar pill, and you utilize it in patients that are lactose intolerant, which could be with many immune deficiency disorders, including AIDS or other things, you're going to create a scenario where the placebo actually is going to play out worse. In other words, you're guaranteeing a worse scenario of extreme, or let's say extra symptoms. And so you could say, wow, the drug didn't do that, but the placebo did, so our drug is obviously better. Now, that would be a result that would not be in real world better than, but only in testing a placebo that suddenly we know is going to create a worse problem. And the fact of the matter is these drug companies are in charge of supplying the very placebo that they're testing against. So they have an investment to make sure that their drug would perform or outperform placebo or do something better or different than the placebo.
Right.
Now, it's interesting. We have to go back a couple of hundred years to the founder, a physician by the name of Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, who you know very well, founded homeopathic medicine in Germany. And homeopathy acknowledges the placebo effect. They acknowledge that your belief, your expectation plays a role in healing. Any holistically minded healer, whether they be a regular medical doctor or not, that does not acknowledge the fact that they have an impact, the doctor has an impact on healing, would be at this point, I think, delusional. And in fact, when you really look at placebo-controlled study, there's no way to really completely remove it from any interaction, because even the person that's being tested, so to speak, the subject within a test, is going to be impacted by whether they like the nurse or doctor prescribe or giving the drug. There's just human interaction you can never account for, emotional interaction you can never account for.
Well, of course.
which, frightens me when we consider all the cancer doctors that tell people that they have 2-3 weeks, 2-3 months to live, and they know, in fact, that they're basically issuing a death sentence, when we know, looking at these things nutritionally, there have been people that have lived years and years longer than those so-called death sentences because certain physicians had the courage to look differently at cancer and to see cancer as a nutritional deficiency and toxicological problem over a long time. So the physicians that are working on detoxification protocols and re-nutrifying, like Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, who we've talked about here, has been featured in the media, has written books, One Man Alone, about some dramatic new, or even old, let's say, but validated ways of pulling poisons out of the body and how it changes the terrain of the body. And then we see recoveries from cancer. Supposedly, since Nixon's war on cancer, they haven't developed even one synthetic substance that actually cures cancer, yet they'll attack the physicians that dare to say, hey, let's look at this differently. We don't need to add poison to the body. Let's remove poisons that are already there and see what happens. And amazingly enough, nature, God, creation, whatever you want to call it, finds a way to heal the body.
Exactly.
So all we argue for here is the freedom to heal. My goodness, what an outrageous thing to argue for freedom in America. The land that started with the Declaration of Independence, which was all about liberty. And yet all we're doing is something so outrageous as that we're calling for the reduction of the government as it's involved in so many aspects of so-called health care, which we know and you know is disease management. And in addition to Obama's scare, it goes even further. There's no basis constitutionally for the promotion of one form of medicine over another to establish monopolies. But in addition to Obamacare, there was an executive order signed recently, and this was supposed to take effect as of June 10th, 2010. Obama signed Executive Order 13544.
Well, what is that?
This executive order basically says the establishing the National Prevention, Health Promotion, and Public Health Council. And what this would do was establishing a 12-member board, actually more than that, but basically all the heads of the different departments, agriculture, labor, health and human services, transportation, what they're doing in a health panel, I don't know. Secretary of Education, which we would argue the whole department should be disbanded. Secretary of Homeland Security, what do they have to do with health? Administrator of the EPA, seemingly never met a pollutant they don't like. The chair of the Federal Trade Commission, director of National Drug Control Policy. We go on and on. We see all of these people that know little or nothing about health and everything about perhaps limiting the Americans' knowledge of what is really healthy so that they can promote an agenda of what? Detection. Wait
a minute. What does that actually mean?
Anytime you see prevention from the federal government, it's not truly prevention, it's about detecting stuff. So they want to give women mammograms with ionizing radiation, which we know contributes to cancer. They want to use vaccinations, which they're very upset because many Americans are questioning the whole validity of the paradigm, and we would only argue for the freedom of a parent to say it's your decision, not the government's decision, as to what kind of interventions your children get. That is freedom. If you don't believe in that, then you believe in collectivism and medical collectivism, that we're all, as we've talked about before, Michael, we're all a bunch of cattle, moo cows, sheep.
The sheeple?
And that we must just believe whatever the government says, even though they're largely conflicted, because as we know, we've talked as well about the revolving door between the CDC, the FDA, and the pharmaceutical industrial complex.
They've been on the same team for years.
But we can always count on big government to come and save us at the end of the day. Of course, as the government is running out of money, as they have for a long time, and they're looking for new ways to tax, they can always go to the trans fat police.
You can't be serious.
Yes, the trans fat police in Baltimore are now handing out citations, fines, establishing new taxes if they find local eateries distributing anything that may have trans fats in them. Of course, we're not endorsing trans fats, but how much of a nanny state do we really need, Michael? Obama's not enough. Now we got the local municipalities getting in on the act to fine you if you dare eat or sell trans fats. Of course, those that want to do that, we might consider not so nutritionally intelligent, but would we endorse a new police state to prevent people from deciding what they want to eat? I don't think that we could endorse that. But, of course, that's where this is all heading. From Obama scare to the executive orders, now to trans fat police at the local municipal levels. as opposed to what we covered. You got diabetes? Hey, look for glucose tolerance factor chromium instead of drugs. Imagine that. But we're not allowed to know that. Not in the nanny state Obama scare kind of environment in which we currently live.
Thanks for the update, Robert.
Thanks again, Michael. Always an honor to share this message of health freedom with the Savage Nation audience and you. And please have your listeners come to my website at robertscottbell.com to learn more.
I'm sure you've read my chapter on the myth of global warming and trickle-up poverty. Not only do you have to look at the data they give you, but now you have to look at who's behind the tests. It's as I've been telling my audience for years, take a look at the money. This is the Savage Nation. Savage.